Hello and welcome back to the channel, everyone. So it's been quite a while since I posted a video, and there have been a couple of reasons for that. The first reason is that I've been spending more time with Eloise. She's grown bigger. She's now almost 3 years old, so I found increasingly I was spending my time with her at the weekends, doing family outings, and that left less time for creating videos. The other reason is we moved house, so that took up quite a bit of energy. We were lucky to move just before the interest rates really started ramping up. So we're in a bigger house now, and that gives Eloise a bit more room to run around, which I'm very grateful for. And the third reason, which I wanted to talk about today in this video, is I've been diagnosed with bowel cancer. And one of my previous videos where I talk about keratoconus, the eye disease I have, that gets a lot of views still. I think it's probably one of my most viewed videos from when I used to make videos. And I get people message me on Instagram and ask me about keratoconus, and I'm always happy to kind of give my advice. I'm not an expert on the disease. But I thought, since that video on keratoconus seems to offer people some support, I would kind of do the same thing with my experience with bowel cancer and talk about my journey so far. I'm not finished on that journey, but this felt like a good time to kind of talk about what I've been through so far, symptoms I've had, experiences I've had, and then I can probably do an update. So, bowel cancer then. I was diagnosed last November, but I started noting symptoms in August of 2022. So in August I went away. It's quite memorable for me because we went away to a little shepherd's hut, me and my girlfriend Lauren, and we stayed away for the weekend. I just remember thinking that weekend it was a really nice weekend away in this Airbnb, but I noticed something wasn't right. I was noticing more blood in my poo than I was used to. I mean, I've been used to having kind of small amounts of blood on the toilet paper from hemorrhoids, and that's usually quite bright red. But I was noticing this weekend that when I was going to the loo, quite a lot of blood was coming out, and sometimes the toilet tissue would be full of like mucousy blood, and it would almost be the whole tissue would be covered with it. So I just dropped my post-its with my notes of key points, just fell off. So yeah, I mean, it was an unusual amount of blood. It was sometimes it looked a bit like jam, where it was a bit mucousy. Sometimes it was darker red, but it was just more than I was used to, and I was a bit worried about it. I tried not to let it spoil the weekend, and it didn't really. We had a good weekend. I was probably running off to the loo as much as I thought was normal at that point. So anyway, we got back, and that was August. I kind of didn't do anything about it immediately, which I probably should have, but I kind of, being a typical man, I sat on it. Throughout September, we had Eloise's second birthday, and the symptoms sort of came and went. Like, some weeks I'd get a lot of blood and it'd be every time I went to the loo, and then maybe it would go away for a little bit and I'd think, oh great, it's gone. And then it would come back. So around October, a sort of month had passed and it hadn't gone away, and I thought, right, I better go and see a doctor about this because it doesn't seem to be getting any better on its own. I saw my doctor, went to see the local GP. He did the test where he stuck a finger up my bum, which is the first time I've ever had that done. Not too pleasant, but I'm glad I had it done because he could feel something. He wasn't sure what he could feel, but he could feel something in my rectum. And he said, right, we're going to refer you to a specialist. I'm going to refer you for a ulcerative polyp, I think is what he put on the letter. I didn't really know what that meant at that time, but I thought, okay, I'm being referred. I kind of thought I'd go to the GPs and he would say, yeah, you've got a stomach bug, or maybe you've got a bit of colitis or Crohn's, or, you know, maybe something a bit ulcerative going on, but probably nothing to worry about. I wasn't really thinking I'd have cancer. So, yeah, so the GP referred me, and then sort of beginning of November, I had my appointment with a consultant surgeon that I'm still with now. I went to his clinic and he used a kind of sigmoid scope and had a look, couldn't really see anything, but also put his finger up my bum, which is an interesting experience, but you can't get used to it when you got bowel cancer, I guess. yeah, and he could feel a lump as well. And he said, well, normally people who present with bowel cancer are a bit older. You're not the typical age group that present with kind of these kind of symptoms, but I can definitely feel something, so I want you to go for a colonoscopy. So I thought, great, another camera. I'd previously had an endoscopy with a camera down the throat a couple of years ago. I was getting a lot of acid reflux, but they didn't find anything when they did that. So I kind of knew what it was like having a scope. This time colonoscopy obviously goes up the anus. So I had a colonoscopy. That was done under sedation. I'm not going to lie, it's kind of the sedation works, but I was kind of conscious. They kind of got to a U-bend or a corner or something. I could feel it, and I was like, well, that's a bit painful. And I was obviously conscious enough to kind of feel it, and I said, oh, that's a bit painful. And they gave me gas and air. And then the gas and air made me really kind of high and quite happy, and I remember feeling quite lightheaded. And at that point, I was kind of, because of the gas and air, I was happy enough to actually watch the screens and see what's going on with the camera on the colonoscopy. And the consultant doing the colonoscopy said, I can see a tumour. And that was kind of the first time that someone told me they'd felt a tumour. Oh, well, not they could feel a tumour. I guess he could see a tumour on the camera and actually see it. And I was watching it on the screen as well, and I could see it. So, yeah, so the rest of the colonoscopy was a bit of a blur because of the sedation. And then I went to recovery. I was like, oh, they can see something. And then I was so high on the gas and air, I wasn't really that upset about it. So they took me off to a room. I guess that's where you know that they found something. When they usher you off to a room after recovery, they called Lauren in, and I didn't realise they'd called her. So it was kind of a surprise to see Lauren in the room as well. And that's where you kind of think, oh, it's going to be some sort of news, isn't it? So there's a nurse specialist that's been assigned to me who was brilliant. She kind of sat me down and said, look, this is what they found and this is what it could mean. It's quite low in your rectum. We're going to do some further tests. We're going to give you an MRI. We're going to give you a CT scan, and we'll see how those goes, and then you'll come back for another consultation. So I was still quite happy at that point with the gas and air. I remember saying to her, are you going to remove my bum hole? Are you going to sew my bum hole up? I don't know why those questions were on my mind, but I was in my kind of happy place on the gas and air, so wasn't too down about it, kind of just took it in my stride, which is kind of what I've been doing throughout this whole journey. So that was a colonoscopy. I then went for an MRI, which is the first time I've been for an MRI. It's magnetic resonance imaging. It's you sit on a bed and you kind of go into the donut thing and it spins around you. You're in there for about half an hour. They inject some contrast dye, and they get using magnetic resonance, they get a very clever, detailed picture of the tissue and what's going on. I then had a CT scan. I like CTs because they're quite quick. They're same kind of thing, slightly different shaped donut. You lie on a bed, you go into the CT scanner, and it creates another image, but it uses radiation to get that image. So I think they use contrast dye as well. An MRI on my pelvis seems to take about half an hour, and I've had quite a few MRIs now, and I tend to just chill out and try to go to sleep a bit in them. Although they are quite noisy, you have to have earplugs and then headphones with music. But yeah, MRIs, I find the best thing to do is just kind of do some deep breathing, try and relax. You probably won't be able to fall asleep, but just try and chill out as much as possible because they can last about half an hour. I really should sellotape my notes. So I had this MRI, had the CT scan, then had another appointment just at the beginning of December at this point, back with the surgeon that I'm under and the consultant, and he told me, we can see it on the colonoscopy, the MRI and CT scan have confirmed it as well. There's a 4 centimetre tumour. It's very close to your rectum, so it's not very far in. That's why they could feel it when they were fingering me. And then he's kind of said, well, it's not got very clean margins, so it's quite close to the edge. It looks like 3 lymph nodes are also perhaps not looking quite right. They're quite big and inflamed, I guess. Cancer has different stages, and they don't like to talk about staging too much, but obviously there's a stage 1 tumour which is quite localised, quite early. I can't remember the difference between stage 1 and stage 2, if I'm honest. And stage 3 just means there's lymph nodes involved, so it's beginning to spread. It's affected some lymph nodes, but that's about as far as it's got. And then you get stage 4, unfortunately, which is where it's you get metastases, which are secondary sites of cancer. So you get stage 4 is where you've got a secondary site, so the cancer has spread from the original site, and it's spread. Typically, it seems to spread to your lungs or your liver. Can spread all over the body to all different types, and then unfortunately at stage 4 the chances of survival of bowel cancer are quite low. It's sort of 1 in 10, I think. So you don't really want to get to stage 4, and I feel really sorry for anyone who does get diagnosed at stage 4. Stage 3 is where I'm at. I think he said there was around, they don't like giving you percentages, doctors, because I guess it is a bit of a finger in the air, but he said there's a 60% chance you'll make it to 5 years with stage 3, and then if it's treated, which it is quite treatable still. Bowel cancer is quite slow growing, I understand, so it's quite treatable. Chances are you'll treat it, you'll go on and live a normal life afterwards, and that's kind of what I've been thinking most of the way through my treatment. So I left kind of knowing I had stage 3 cancer. They talked about what was next for me, so because the margins weren't that clean, so he said 50% of the time with bowel cancer they'll do surgery first. 50% of cases now they'll do chemo and radiation first, and it really depends on your setup and your situation. So with me, he wanted to do chemo and radiation first to shrink the tumour, and then he said we'll look at surgery if you still need it. In most cases people need surgery. It's very rare that you get a full clinical response, and a full clinical response is where the chemo and the radiation kind of annihilate or get rid of the tumour completely, and it shrinks away and there's nothing left, and then you're kind of left in the watch and wait thing. So I started chemo on the 21st of December, so I kind of noticed I noticed the symptoms of the cancer on August, and then 21st of December was my first round of chemo. So it'd been pretty quick, and I'd been pretty impressed with the NHS at this point. They don't hang around when it's cancer, and although the British NHS gets a bit of a bad press, I've been absolutely blown away with how fantastic everyone's been, and the service I've got so far. I can't fault how they've treated my cancer, because I do have Bupa private healthcare with my work, and a lot of people said, well, you're going to go down the Bupa route, but actually with the NHS it's been brilliant, and you also get a nurse specialist assigned to you on the NHS, which I wouldn't have on my private care. So I kind of feel like NHS is the way to go. Plus they have all the up-to-date equipment in the NHS, and they're just brilliant. So there's been no thought of going down the private route in my mind for this one. I previously had my keratoconus done under Bupa, but I think for cancer, then actually the NHS is probably a very good way to go. I mean, as I'll get on to later, the radiotherapy machines, they've got these new machines that means you don't have to have a little tattoo where they need to, it's all done with lasers, and these machines are like several £1,000,000 each, and they've got 6 of them at my local hospital, so they're absolutely fantastic facilities they've got there. So so first up was a chemo starting the 21st December. I had 4 rounds of chemo, so 4 cycles, so it was sort of an infusion and then a couple of weeks where I was supposed to take tablets, and then another infusion and a couple of weeks, so it was 4 rounds. I didn't really know what I was getting into with chemo, but obviously with cancer you don't get a choice with any of this treatment. Well, you do get a choice, but it's kind of like, well, you do the treatment, or if you don't, then the cancer spreads and then you're probably going to die. So there isn't really much choice in my mind. I just, I go along with whatever the doctors have been recommending for me. So I went and started the chemo, and typical for bowel cancer, you have this oxaliplatin drug, and I can never remember the bills, the yeah, you take these tablets as well alongside them, which is a kind of a daily tablet. So you have the infusion, then you have a daily tablet until your next round. And what I found is the infusion was fine. They put the oxaliplatin in very slowly. I had it intravenously into a vein. I learnt to kind of alternate arms. So one infusion you get one arm, next infusion you get in the other arm. Oxaliplatin can give you a side effect called neuropathy, which is where you get sort of a bit of nerve damage, and it's certainly got tingly fingers. You get very sensitive to the cold. It does change your sense of taste. You can't, after you've had the infusion, you can't really touch cold things out the fridge or cold water. You can't drink cold drinks. You get so sensitive to the cold, you have to drink kind of lukewarm drinks or tea. It completely changed my taste, actually. I couldn't drink tea or coffee. They just tasted weird. I'm quite a big coffee and tea drinker. And I was off tea and coffee. I kind of started drinking fizzy drinks at room temperature and kind of herbal teas while I was on chemo. What else? With me, I had a really unusual side effect of chemo. So I had really severe chest cramping after the first 2 infusions. So the day afterwards, I would get these severe pains that left me rolling around on the floor in agony. It was so painful I couldn't speak. I thought I might be having a heart attack. So with the NHS, they have an acute oncology phone number. So if any problems, you can call that number. Obviously, because of the chest pains, I called that number. You can go in. They've got a little ward, and the problem is, if you mentioned chest pains, they were like, no, you need to go to A&E. So I went to A&E, spent a day in A&E where they monitored me, and they took an ECG and looked at my heart rhythm, because I've been saying I've got chest pains. And they looked at my my kind of ECG, and they were, well, that looks a bit weird. That's not quite right. We're going to keep you in. So I spent a day in A&E, and then at the end of the day, they sent me up to the cardiac ward, and I spent a night on the cardiac ward being monitored as well. And this was going into Christmas Eve as well by now. So Christmas Eve is when I went to A&E, and then Christmas Eve I was sort of waking up on the cardiac ward. What we kind of eventually worked out, I guess, or the doctors kind of worked out, is that what was showing in my ECG was an existing problem. So I've inherited cardiomyopathy, tachycardia. So it's a slightly unusual heartbeat, and it sort of shows that there's a bit of thickening in the heart. It is a bit of a risk. I've since gone on and had cardiac MRIs. I've worn a 48-hour tape, and they confirmed that diagnosis. So I've inherited the same kind of heart problem that my dad has. So he's had it for years and just been monitored. He has now been fitted with a defibrillator, but most of his life he's just been monitored, and it's not caused him any issues. So I was in A&E because of the chemo symptoms, but they picked up this heart disease. So when the sort of cardiac surgeons have been talking to me on the phone and kind of going through this with me, I find it hard to get excited about it because I have bowel cancer, and it seems in my mind I was kind of focused on the bowel cancer, and the cardiomyopathy was kind of a secondary thing. I suspected I might have inherited it from my dad, but obviously because I've been in the hospital so much, they've kind of confirmed that diagnosis. So for the cardiomyopathy, I'm just under yearly monitoring now. It doesn't really cause me any issues. They'll keep monitoring. I have a very low risk score. They have done some genetic testing and confirmed I do have a genetic marker for it, so it is inherited. But so I went through all kind of the heart diagnosis, and the oncologist stopped the drugs, and I had a little pause, and then after talking with the oncologist, we kind of worked out that it was actually cramping. And what I was getting is just severe chest cramps and muscle cramps in my chest. So for the next infusion, they lowered my dose of oxaliplatin to 80%, and I didn't have any I didn't have any chest cramping after that. So the lower dose kind of infusion 3 and 4, I didn't have any of those horrible kind of chest cramps. So that was much better. I found I'd have the infusion on the Wednesday. I'd be very kind of feeling quite ill and sorry for myself on the Thursday and the Friday, and then the Saturday and Sunday. So I'd take Thursday and Friday off work, recovering, and Saturday and Sunday, and I'd probably be in bed for all those 4 days. I would be quite a weak and a bit sick and not really being able to taste stuff. And by Monday I'd be a bit shaky, but I'd go back to work, and I work from home anyway from my home office. So I work in IT, so by Monday I could work, and then I would keep working until the next infusion, go back in on Wednesday, and then take a bit of time off to recover. But I found 4 days after infusion I could kind of get back to normal. But I think it depends on the individual and how, and one thing I've learned is all chemo drugs are kind of different. So there's lots of different chemo drugs. I didn't lose my hair because with the bowel cancer drugs, you don't typically lose your hair. So oxaliplatin, I perhaps had a little bit of thinning. I don't know. I've got quite a lot of thick hair, luckily still. It's receding a little bit. But yeah, I kept my hair. I think it's typically more with other drugs, like some of the breast cancer drugs, where people lose your hair. But it's the first thing people always ask about chemo is, are you going to lose your hair? I didn't. And that's just because the drugs for bowel cancer don't cause you to lose your hair. So I was a bit rough that Christmas, obviously, because I did get out on the Christmas Eve, but I felt quite ill on Christmas Day. Didn't really eat much of my Christmas dinner. I think spent most of the day in pyjamas. So it wasn't the best Christmas, but I'm sure there'll be many more Christmases to come. Fingers crossed, I would. Chemotherapy took me all the way up to March, and then by March I'd had my 4th cycle and recovered, and then they put me on radiotherapy, and you keep taking the chemotherapy tablets as well during radiotherapy. So I had 25 doses of radiotherapy, and radiotherapy is very clever. The way they explained it to me is they do a planning scan, and they essentially said they take a 3D model of your tumour, and then they divide it into 50 segments. And then every time you come in, the radiotherapy machine will blast 2 of the segments. So 25 sessions should blast all 50 segments that they divided your tumour into. So every day with radiotherapy, I had to go in there every weekday. My cancer, I could have a break over the weekend, which was nice. So every weekday at around 9 a.m, I would go into Southampton General, which is the hospital I'm at. You have to drink, you have to fill your bladder, which is the trickiest thing about radiotherapy, I felt. You kind of got to fill your bladder so that your bladder moves out the way a little bit and it's not getting all the radioactivity, sort of protects it a bit. So you kind of got to fill your bladder, but it's a really tricky thing because you've got to fill it, but you've also got to then lie on this machine. So you can't be, and I think after 25 days, I was still learning the amount of water I need to drink. You drink too much and then you're going to have to pee, and if you pee you empty your bladder and it might not have enough liquid in it for them to do it. You've got to have enough liquid so that they can perform the radio session, and then so you've got to have enough liquid in your bladder for them to proceed, but you can't have too much in because if you're desperate it's not very comfortable, and if you pee then you might have to start drinking again. So it's a bit faffy, but you kind of find a way through it, and you get through it. And so I had the 25 sessions. I was very lucky. I didn't have too many side effects. Well, I did have one major side effect, which was it made me need the loo a lot. So I kind of became very urgent. I had a lot of diarrhea. I had to run to the loo a lot. I had to start taking Imodium. I was taking 2 Imodium a day just so that I could get to the appointments. I found there was a couple of occasions where I had to stop on the way, and I was like, I can't even get to the hospital now without needing. So yeah, I was saying I didn't have many side effects from radiotherapy. I didn't have any pain. There was a bit of sensitivity in my bladder around that area, but the machine's quite good. If you're lying on a bed, the radiotherapy machine basically spins around you in like 360 degrees. So that means it's hitting the tumour every time, but it's your kind of skin and organs around it are only getting like 1/360th degree of the radiation, while the tumour's kind of getting focused on. So yeah, I had a bit of bladder sensitivity, but that wasn't too bad. And with the Imodium, I could kind of get to the appointments, and yeah, they just had to keep taking Imodium really, so that I didn't have any accidents. And actually, I did have a few accidents. Something with radiotherapy, like it made, I mean, it's making all that kind of tissue in your rectum kind of very inflamed. And yeah, I mean, there's a few times where in my own house I suddenly need to go to the loo. You know, I'm probably, you know, I'm a room or two away from a toilet, so and even like that 5 meter walk, sometimes I didn't make it to the toilet, and I had a little accident. But that's just part of radiotherapy and bowel cancer. So radiotherapy finished in April. After that, the radiotherapy keeps functioning, or keeps working on your on the tumour and the site. So they watch and they do a sort of watch and wait to see how the radiotherapy gets on. So they waited for 6 weeks. At 6 weeks point, they gave me a CT scan and an MRI. And then in that CT and following that CT and MRI, they kind of told me that the tumour is shrinking, so it's looking good. I probably got my hopes up a little bit that I would be one of those full clinical responses, but alas, that wasn't quite what's happened. So after the 6 week MRI and CT, they waited another 6 weeks to see if the tumour continued to shrink. At the 12-week point, they did a CT and MRI scan. And after that CT and MRI, they called me back in to see the consultant, and they told me that yes, the radiotherapy and chemotherapy have been very successful. They've cleaned up the site, the margins look better, the lymph nodes look a lot better. However, the tumour's shrunk, but it shrunk from about 4 centimetres down to 1 centimetre, so there's still some tumour there. And at this point, they can't give you any more radiotherapy because it would just do too much damage. So the best course of action for me now is to have surgery. This is the point I'm at now. I kind of was told that news a couple of weeks ago, so I've had a week or two getting used to it and getting ready for the surgery I'm about to have. The surgery I'm going to have is called APR surgery, and I can't remember what that stands for, but essentially they're going to remove my entire rectum and give me a permanent stoma. In my case, unfortunately, the cancer and the tumour is so low down that he said, I asked the question if I could be reconnected, and of course I think everyone in my situation asked that, but he said because we've got to kind of cut around the tumour to give you kind of some hope of getting all the cancer, I guess, and cleaning that site up, that cut around the tumour would mean cutting through my kind of sphincter muscles. So he said basically I could reconnect you technically, but you would be incontinent, you would be sitting in shit all the time. So I think actually, I mean, that's quite clear. He said I was quite a clear-cut case that I would need a permanent bag, and that that was the best course of action. I'm kind of, I wouldn't say I'm happy about it, but I've accepted that fact that, I've been learning about stoma bags. I saw the stoma nurse this week. I'm kind of not happy about it, but I've kind of understood that might be the possible option for me since last November and since I've diagnosed. So so the next stage for me is going for surgery. So this Tuesday I will go in to the hospital. Apparently I'll be in hospital for about 7 to 12 days after the surgery, and then I'll come back home and I'll have to slowly get used to, get myself mobile. So they're going to remove my anus and the kind of sphincter muscles and then the entire rectum. So there's going to be a wound obviously between my legs, and I'm going to have a new stoma, which is going to take a bit of adjustment. So it's going to be a big change over the next few kind of weeks and months, but I'll probably do a follow-up video just to say how it's gone. So interesting times. I've heard a few things that have kind of helped me kind of come to terms with it. I do have a bit of a dark sense of humour, and there was one quote in a stoma kind of support book that I was reading the other day, and it said just better a stoma than a coffin, and that is true in my situation. It's better having a stoma than letting the cancer still exist and potentially spread. Yeah, so the other quote, or the other piece of advice that I liked was, it's not a bag for life. A lot of people say it's like a bag for life, like the shopping bags. It's a bag for living. So this bag will enable me to live and see my daughter grow up. So yeah, it's a bag for living. I kind of like thinking about it that way. So yeah, so next bit is to get a stoma. I'm actually wearing a test stoma. So the company that provides stoma bags kind of give you these test ones. I've been wearing this the last few days. I've gone running with it on. I filled it with water. I went to a barber's appointment with it on. I've showered a couple of times with it on. It just gets a bit used to it. It does help get used to the crinkly noise. Yeah, and this is on the kind of the other side. So this mark here is where the stoma nurse measured me up. So I got measured up, and they do a few tests, like they get you to sit down and see if you can see where the mark is. So this is just blue felt tip with a dressing on it. I need to keep this on until Tuesday because this is where the stoma will be. And then this is the little practice one where I'm just getting used to seeing what it feels like to have something on there. They give you this little red nubbin, and then you put a bag around it. So it's kind of as close to simulating the real thing as you can get, I guess. So yeah, that's kind of me and a bit of an update on my life, and a bit of a gone on a bit about bowel cancer, but hopefully watching this video will help someone in the future. There are lots of really good support groups on Facebook, and I'll link a couple of them in the description. I've certainly used them and posted and had people reply and give me advice on things, and it really helps kind of talking to people. So yeah, I'll link those in the description. So my camera ran out of battery, which isn't surprising, as it's been sitting in a drawer for a couple of years. So anyway, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Perhaps if you've got a question about bowel cancer, I'm not an expert on it, but yeah, maybe put a question down in the comments and I'll try and answer from my experience best I can. I wish you all the best, and yeah, just thank you for watching this video.